Thank you very much, Vito. It's really a pleasure to be here this morning and to talk to an organization that has such a long record of embracing noble and intellectually courageous work. It's really refreshing to be with a group that deals with the basics of reason and making sense out of reality. Move this down a bit. I wrote a feature last year about your organization with Susan as my main source. The American Humanist of the Year reads like a Who's Who Hall of Fame. I possess a Margaret Sanger Award called the Maggie Awards through Planned Parenthood for something I wrote in 1986 about putting some sanitary to sex education. Alice Walker, your 1997 award recipient, is an icon in our movement to end all genital mutilation. Nearly 10 years ago, I read her book, Warrior March, chronicling what she saw in Africa regarding the brutal female circumcision practice. I interviewed your 2003 winner, Sherman T. Wine, founder of Jewish Humanist, when he came to Tempe some years back. I was born exactly 25 years to the day of Betty Friedan, your 1975 winner for all of her pioneering work in the women's movement, and your 1968 winner was baby doctor Dr. Benjamin Spock, who completely reversed himself on circumcision when in 1989 he said, "I'm in favor of leaving the penis alone. Pediatric opinion is swinging away from routine circumcision as unnecessary and at least mildly dangerous. I also believe that there is potential danger of emotional harm resulting from the operation," so said Benjamin Spock. So you humanists have recognized some great people as Humanists of the Year, many of them forces for sexual human rights. And I applaud you for 2 weeks ago having your speaker, my friend, State Representative Kirsten Sinema, as your speaker. I first met Kirsten in 2001 when she performed in a 50-minute play in a Phoenix theater called Jacob's Gift. Kirsten played the lead role of a Jewish mother, earnestly trying to keep her newborn son from having to undergo a bris, the ritual circumcision on his 8th day as a newborn Jew. In that play, the mother puts up a valiant fight, but capitulated in the end. Yet the character, Eileen Levy, so powerfully voiced the protests and the sobs of many Jews over the decades and ages, wanting to keep their offspring from having to undergo the procedure that robs them of their foreskins. So I'm here today because in hospitals across this valley and across this nation and this world, baby boys are being born, and they'll be born today and tomorrow and the next day, and those helpless little guys will be rolled into a room, and some circumciser will amputate part of their penises against their will, without their consent, an insidious kind of cosmetic surgery to satisfy adult needs, notions, and entrenched tribal traditions. I was just a baby, I couldn't stop them, said a circumcised man, reflecting on what happened to him. They'll be strapped down in plastic holder, their limbs restrained by Velcro straps, and will be spread-eagled. Their foreskins will be clipped in a quick and brutal procedure. Those newborn males will be changed forever. Their circumcision scar will be there on their penises always. An estimated 3,300 circumcisions a day take place in America, or 1.3 million have their foreskins annually clipped off painfully and permanently. It won't be a pretty sight what the circumcisers do to them. There will be torturous pain, bloody glands exposed to the world years before nature intended it to be out there in the air. Even with anesthetic used at the time of cutting, the anesthetic wears off and the urine and waste in his diaper will burn the raw nerve endings until healing occurs. That's healing. The foreskin at birth and into his early life is fused to the glands like fingernails to a finger. So the circumciser must use the instruments to tear it loose and tug the free foreskin up to put other tools to work, crushing the foreskin and then cutting it off. Whether it's a Gomco clamp or Plastabel, a Mogan clamp or a Sheldon crushing clamp, it gets the job done with the efficiency of a guillotine. Those awful tools actually belong in a Marquis de Sade museum with the other torture instruments from history. So why have I taken up this cause? You say there are worse things out there, things to be outraged about, worse acts of inhumanity on this planet. Why do I protest circumcision? Why do I write and speak against it? Because as repulsive and indecent practices go, condemning circumcision is really a no-brainer. It's cruel, intrusive, and needless. That seems so obvious and self-apparent that to not speak out would be like saying it's okay to kick the dog, to keep women from voting, or to let religious right people keep on putting gay people down in this country. I could go on concentrating my energies on hundreds of injustices throughout this world, but not enough people seem to recognize the human rights violation that is routine infant circumcision. So I join many others in voicing outrage toward this cutting of healthy, living, purposeful skin from the helpless who can only scream in terror. Parents today may sign informed consent forms before it's done on their baby boys, but do they really know what they are doing? And aren't they just conforming to what they think they're supposed to do? It's the circumcisers. We don't like to call them doctors. Many of them aren't physicians anyway. We call them circumcisers, who whack away, who should be shamed out of doing what they do. They are the true villains in all of this, but parents won't enlighten themselves, so the circumcisers keep on perpetuating this outrage. Circumcision violates the Hippocratic Oath. It's foreskin amputated by force, the deliberate, irretrievable destruction of healthy, normal, irreplaceable, erogenous tissue. That's a statement by John Erickson, the late John Erickson of Biloxi, Mississippi, a wonderful man who wrote about deeper into circumcision and an invitation to awareness. The Hippocratic Oath says, "First, do no harm." Hippocrates said, "I will prescribe regimen for the good of my patients according to my ability and my judgment, and never do harm to anyone." A newborn is brought into this world. What do the circumcisers do? They mutilate the specialized coverings of his penis. Oddly, you'll have parents attend Lamaze classes and go to great pains to make birth as least stressful and painful as possible, as non-violent, as gentle as possible. And what will some of these parents do next? Ship the boy off to the circumcisers right away. And there their son experiences the first violence in his life. Welcome to the world of pain and violence, kid. You didn't ask for it, but you're going to get it anyway. There's a saying that God didn't make junk. Through millions of years of development or evolving, the human body has become an amazing machine with so many subtle components that we're only now understanding and researching. The foreskin was put there for a reason. After I saw my first infant circumcision, said registered nurse Marilyn Milos, founder of the National Organization of Circumcision Information and Resources Center in San Anselmo, California, a woman we've visited once, I began my work to stop the screams of babies, and suddenly men began to scream. Circumcision is genital mutilation, penile reduction surgery, a form of sanctioned sexual abuse imposed on the helpless against their wills. The amputation of the protective, nerve-rich foreskin converts an internal structure of the glands or the head into an external organ, a body part that is hung out to dry, literally hung out to dry, and becomes desensitized and keratinized. Circumcision removes 1/3 to 1/2 of the skin of the penile shaft, said Dr. Ron Goldman, Executive Director of the Circumcision Resource Center in Boston, who is Jewish and author of Circumcision, The Hidden Trauma. He says the average circumcision cuts off what could grow into 12 square inches of sexually sensitive skin. And Canadian pathologist John Taylor calls the foreskin one of the key erogenous zones of the male body. It's 240 feet of nerves and 1,000 nerve endings. They're similar to those of the fingers and the lips, which are very sensitive in our bodies. The fact is, Ron Goldman says, when it comes to sex, circumcised men don't know what they're missing. Male circumcision removes thousands of erogenous nerve endings, including the ridged band and some of all of the frenulum, which toes back and anchors the foreskin, just like that little structure under your tongue that seems to tie down your tongue in the bottom of your mouth. In addition, circumcision deprives the glands remaining in the shaft skin of its natural protective covering, causing the body to respond by forming multiple layers of desensitizing keratin, like this callus on your fingers, dead skin. Circumcision also destroys the frictionless natural gliding mechanism that protects against chafing and dryness during sexual intercourse. In a men's health feature titled "Separated at Birth, Did Circumcision Ruin Your Sex Life?" a Pennsylvania man noted he was circumcised as an adult. He said, quote, "Sex before circumcision was like driving a luxury car with automatic transmission. I used to just glide along," he said. "Sex now is like driving a tiny, powerless compact with a manual transmission. It takes a lot of work to get anywhere." And he added, "My penis has lost 90% of its sensitivity." The foreskin is a complex device. It's a two-layer organism similar to the eyelid. It is designed to protect the head of the penis from abrasions and infections. The foreskin surface represents an average of 50% of all penile skin as it folds around the end of the penis. Its inner surface is composed of soft mucosa that secures antibacterial and antiviral lubricants called smegma, which isn't a nasty thing, which further protects the glands or head from friction and infection. That sheath of skin helps protect and give overall sensitivity. And during sex, the foreskin glides and stretches along the penile shaft, providing lubricant and stimulation. I put on this marquee off of a little plastic glove, showing what the foreskin. If this was the foreskin of the uncircumcised male, this would be covering the foreskin during intercourse. Of course, the whole thing pulls back, and the inside of the foreskin, the shaft, is exposed. But then this rolling back and forth is along the lining of the vagina, and doesn't cause the typical chafing that one gets like a circumcised penis, which is strictly just like a club going through a hole. There's nothing much else beyond that. Circumcision is called the most common surgery in America, as well as the most controversial surgery. Statistics are never quite up to date, but the latest, the 2003 Centers for Disease Control survey, found that circumcision rates of 56% of all male infants in the United States currently, while 44% of people are left intact. Here in the American West, the cutting rate is only 37%, with 63% of males being left alone. Hispanics, Asians, and Native Americans especially don't embrace it, and this being the West, and also being including the huge population of California, where there's a lot more progressives, the circumcision rate is particularly low. Therefore, in the West, we have the best rate of babies being born and left intact. It's extremely high in the South, up to 80% in the Midwest, and where lots of socially entrenched lifestyle and traditions remain. Canada, where all but one insurance company, as well as the national health insurance system, dropped circumcision coverage years ago, we've seen the rate of cutting dropped to about 13% today. In 1975, 30 years ago, the Canadian Pediatric Society declared there was no medical indication for neonatal circumcision. It was strengthened with the new statement in 1996 that, quote, "Circumcision of newborns should not be routinely performed." In Northern Europe, circumcision is done only to treat a disease when there is no other alternative. In Finland, for example, the Central Union of Welfare states that circumcision violates a boy's sexual integrity and alters his body, that it is viewed as inhumane and should be regarded as an assault. And the Ministry of Social Affairs there goes on so far to say that religious freedom does not extend to violating the integrity of a child from birth to the age of majority. One study of Scandinavia, where circumcision is rare, showed that only 0.2% of older boys and men had to be circumcised for medical reasons. There was a time when doctors tried to say that circumcision, that newborn babies don't feel pain and that they didn't feel circumcision. Never mind that they screamed their heads off, but researchers found that their sensitivity in a baby is in fact very high. even during the first few days of birth. That's their reaction to circumcision. Babies scream hysterically at the procedure. They tremble and cry, or hold their breaths and vomit and defecate. Proponents of circumcision will talk about how babies lapse into a deep, peaceful sleep. But Dr. Paul Fly says some babies are so severely traumatized by the experience that they fall into a semi-comatose state. And Fly writes, some circumcisers still pretend that these babies are just falling asleep. Nothing could be further from the truth. No one falls asleep when his sex organs are being cut with a knife. Because he is tied down, a baby has no way to escape, no matter how much he thrashes around. So going into a coma-like state is one way for the baby to distance himself from his agony. But that has dangerous consequences for the brain. Though the actual memory of this event may be lost, the imprint of the trauma could well remain with him. A veteran neuropsychologist, Dr. James Prescott, suggests that circumcision can cause deeper and more disturbing levels of neurological damage as well. Circumcision often disrupts the bonding of a baby to his mother. It commonly amounts to a loss of trust in his surroundings and a defensiveness. There's a reason to believe it upsets natural and primal patterns for breastfeeding. The baby has no choice but to urinate into his new wound and bear the stings of urine on raw flesh. Nurses who work maternity wards say they can always tell which babies in the nursery have been circumcised. They are the babies that act strangely, seem withdrawn, and scream hysterically when they urinate in their diapers. Circumcision is really a dirty little procedure that rarely gets talked about in settings like this. Sadly, the mantra goes, well, it should be left up to the parents to decide. Parents know best. Well, do we let our parents decide who can spank their children silly? Or deprive them of meals until kids will show that they can behave? Or keep our kids in cages because parents know best? There are limits to what we can do to our children. There's a huge movement in this country to see an end to circumcision, and it crosses all religions. There are organizations called Jews Against Circumcision, Catholics Against Circumcision, Mothers Against Circumcision, Doctors Opposing Circumcision, with an acronym of DOC. For many years, I've been a member of the Phoenix chapter of NORM, that's the National Organization of Restoring Men. Males who want to try to be whole again by stretching with tape what remnant there may be left of their foreskins and getting new skin to grow and cover their glands. With tenacity and work, it can be done successfully, and thousands have been able to successfully restore themselves with a foreskin, not the exact thing that they had when they were born. That can never be replaced. But I can attest to how wonderfully it can be done, and the skin is enormously resilient. As you know, people who lose weight and gain weight, the skin contracts and expands enormously well. And you've seen the anthropological pictures from natives who pull their lips and their jaws. The skin can really expand. In fact, last year I had a physician, but not my regular doctor, that I put on my medical chart, normal uncircumcised penis. That was an enormously affirming bit of information, even if not quite true. If anyone wants to talk to me afterwards about our group, which meets the second Saturday night every month in Tempe, to talk to me. We also have a website. There really are so many heroes and human rights folks in this movement. Among them are the nurses of Santa Fe, New Mexico. They founded Nurses for the Rights of the Child. In October 1992, they declared themselves conscientious objectors to circumcision and submitted a formal statement to the physicians, hospital administration, and staff announcing their refusal to assist or participate any longer in circumcision procedures. Other nurses came forward and joined them, and in the end, a total of 24 maternal child care nurses, nearly 50% of the staff, including every Jewish nurse, declared themselves conscientious objectors and agreed to position statement. It had 6 key points and reads as follows. 1. Neonatal circumcision is a violation of the newborn male's rights to a whole and intact body. 2. There are no compelling medical reasons for amputating the penile foreskin. Indeed, amputating the foreskin deprives the infant of a protective and sexually functional part of his body. 3. Circumcision is a surgical procedure with risks of complication, including bleeding, infection, and mutilation. 4. Neonatal circumcision is painful, often inadequate, or no anesthesia is used. Post-operative pain management is rare. 5. Parental information on this subject is too often incomplete or based on myths. Finally, they said, the infant is unable at this vulnerable age to state his own wishes or protect himself. So here were nurses that could no longer stomach the madness and torment of circumcision at St. Vincent's Hospital in Santa Fe. They simply sought to protect unconsenting infants and children from surgical alterations of their healthy genitals. They are very active today. Interestingly, in 1987, I interviewed a nurse from the faculty of the University of New Mexico about all the rumblings going on with the nurses in New Mexico and her objections to it for circumcision as well. And I wrote a column for the Mesa Tribune, but my editor killed that column, saying the topic of circumcision was too trivial and just plain silly. Now that was 18 years ago this month. In our files from 1978 in the Mesa Tribune is an article titled County Official Assails Routine Circumcisions, with a kicker headline that said, Widespread Practice Too Risky. The article said that 88% of boys at Desert Samaritan Hospital, now Banner Desert in Mesa, and 92% of the babies born in Mesa Lutheran were being cut. But Dr. Robert Ganelin, chairman of the pediatrics for Maricopa County Hospital, condemned the practice, saying, quote, I have a great concern for the dollar cost and the time involved. Too much money is being spent for circumcisions that generally are not necessary. Our personnel at county are being taken away from medical skills, medical calls that may be more important, he said. And he added that the kids scream through the entire procedure because it is very painful. And some argue that the kids don't feel it, that they're too young. But in recent years, we've learned that infants during the newborn procedures are far more sensitive than we have given them credit for. Dr. Ganlon retired, and the last time we talked he was living in Scottsdale, and he told me how frustrating it had been to try to wake people up to this procedure. When the Tribune dropped Cigna Healthcare a couple years ago, I was forced to have to find a new doctor, so I deliberately shopped around until I finally found a doctor who had stayed on the record that he opposed circumcision. And I found Dr. Bill McKay of Mesa. Each time I see him, he tells me how the last parents he's talked to, how he talked them out of circumcision. So I say, amen, Brother McKay. I want to just talk about some of the fallacies about circumcision. These are some things that people typically say. Circumcision is necessary. Circumcision is not painful or traumatizing. Circumcision prevents disease. The circumcision penis is cleaner. Circumcision decision is up to the parents. Men don't mind that they are circumcised. A circumcised penis is as good or better than a natural penis. Circumcision has little or no surgical risk. Complications are rare in circumcision surgery. The uncircumcised penis is difficult to care for. The foreskin is extra skin, a mistake of nature. These are myths. A penis with a foreskin looks unnatural. A circumcised penis provides just as much sexual pleasure. Circumcision removes just a snip of skin. A son should look like his father. Every male is circumcised. He should be circumcised to fit in the locker room. Circumcision prevents masturbation. Circumcision is needed to prevent cancer, urinary tract infection. Circumcision prevents sexually transmitted diseases and AIDS. It didn't hurt me. My penis is fine. Christians should be circumcised. Those are just some of the things that are constantly thrown out about this. One of the most compelling issues is equal protection under the law. Now, we salute Congress for passing legislation almost a decade ago banning female circumcision in this country. It came about because a growing number of immigrant families from Africa were seeking to transplant the cultural tradition of performing female genital mutilation or circumcision on their daughters. Female circumcision is very repulsive. I'm sure many of you have read about it, seen some of the shows on cable channels showing some of the people that have really brought it to the fore. Sometimes it is only cutting the clitoris, clitoral hood, and the labia, but more harsh forms include sewing the vagina into a very small hole to emit urine and menses, which not only leads to infections, but painful sex and humiliation, but it also turns women into virtually veritable sexual zombies. Human rights and women's groups were quick to press for a ban on that practice, and I salute them. By the way, there's a powerful film out there that maybe some of you have heard about or seen called New Laid, talking about female genital mutilation in Africa. Of course, we applaud the U.S. government for forthrightly banning female genital mutilation, but it clearly sets up a hypocrisy in the law, a double standard, a glaring matter of unequal protection of all regardless of gender. Intactivists, and that's what's called activists who want to fight for male to be left intact. Intactivists have drawn up a bill seeking sponsorship in the U.S. Congress. It's called the Federal Prohibition of Genital Mutilation Act of 2005. Being enacted by the Senate and the House of Representatives by the United States of America and Congress, assembled to amend the Female Genital Mutilation Act of 1996 to one so that boys, intersex individuals, and non-consenting adults may also be protected from genital mutilation. 2, to increase the maximum punishment of offense to 14 years imprisonment. 3, to include assistance or facilitation of genital mutilation of children or non-consenting adults as an offense, and D, to prohibit persons in the U.S. from arranging or facilitating genital mutilation of children and non-consenting adults in foreign countries. And we certainly know a lot of these people that bring their daughters over here and can't get it done, or just taking them back to Africa, getting them mutilated and bringing them back to this country. There is a bill on the website. It's called mgmbill.org, www.mgmbill.org. Admittedly, given the political climate, such a bill has a proverbial snowball's chance of passage. The bills have also failed in North Dakota legislature, and it's being tried in California. But at least in any event, it's a start. My wife Patty and I decided when our son Eric was born 30 years ago in 1975 that we would not have him circumcised. Probably 90% or more of the baby boys in that hospital were being circumcised at the time. Therefore, most of the males on both sides of our family entered the world in violence, getting their penises reduced out of conformity, out of ignorance. Each year when I write my monstrosity of a long Christmas newsletter, there's always a fat paragraph in there about my circumcision education and prevention work in that year, all to the great chagrin and head shaking of some of my stubborn relatives. But it's all for the baby boys of this world. In 1999, the American Academy of Pediatrics released their latest statement, and it was kind of a mixed bag, but it says, existing scientific evidence demonstrates potential medical benefits of newborn male circumcision. However, these data are not sufficient to recommend routine neonatal circumcision. In circumstances in which there are potential benefits and risks, yet the procedure is not essential to the child's current well-being, parents should determine what is the best interest of their child to make an informed choice. Parents of all male infants should be given accurate and biased information and be provided the opportunity to discuss this decision. If a decision for circumcision is made, procedural anesthesia should be provided. At least in that statement, it says that there's not enough evidence, sufficient evidence to support routine circumcision. Circumcision is little more than sanctioned sexual assault, culturally accepted child abuse, and is a product of the tyranny of cultural traditions fed by reckless and medical folklore. What are the functions of the foreskin? There's protection. It keeps the glands soft, moisture and sensitive. Immunological defense. The foreskin glands produces antibacterial and antiviral proteins. Erogenous sensitivity. Specialized nerve receptors are in it. The coverage during erection expands the skin, allows penile skin to glide freely. The function during sex. Foreskin facilitates smooth, gentle movement of penis without the foreskin and the creation of a moving pressure along the, rather than just friction. How does circumcision harm? It skins the penis, it denudes it, robs male of more than 50% of the penile skin, destroys 3 feet of veins, arteries, capillaries, 240 feet of nerves, and more than 20,000 nerve endings. It also destroys the foreskin muscles, glands, mucous membranes, and epithelial tissue. It desensitizes by eliminating nerves, then exposing the internal structure to the air and abrasive clothing. Being externalized makes the glands permanently exposed to irritation, abrasion, and dryness. It keratinizes, dries, and becomes tougher. The gland takes on a different color or appearance. Remaining penile skin is immobilized with an erection. There's no gliding nor the mechanism by which the glands are normally stimulated. Circumcision disfigures, radically altering the penis's appearance. Bridges and skin tags are a danger. Circumcision disrupts normal circulation of blood through the penile skin system, and circumcision experience leaves detrimental effects on the developing brain. Those are all from some of the reports of Dr. Paul Fleiss, who I talked about earlier. Circumcision is like no other surgery. Circumcision is the strangest operation performed today. No doctor routinely circumcises babies to cure a disease, correct deformity, or repair an injury. Consequently, routine circumcision fails to satisfy any of the mandatory ethical and clinical requirements that any other surgery must meet before doctors are allowed to operate. And that's from Dr. Paul Fleiss and Frederick Hodges' books, What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Circumcision, Untold Facts on America's Most Widely Performed and Most Unnecessary Surgery. Circumcision is little more than sanctioned sexual assault, culturally accepted child abuse. It's a product of the tyranny of cultural traditions fed by reckless medical folklore. Circumcisions have led many parents to think that circumcision is a completely safe operation, but at least one in 500 circumcisions in the U.S. result in serious surgical accident. But even if it were safe, even if it were painless, it's still wrong to perform. This is a matter of social justice and human rights. Dr. Christopher Fletcher of St. Vincent's Hospital in Santa Fe, New Mexico, says that 5 to 15% of U.S. circumcisions result in serious surgical mishaps that may require reconstructive surgery. With his $150 fee, a circumciser doing one cutting a day, 5 days a week, can expect to have a $34 year income, easy money for a timeshare or to help pay for his BMW. He'll be long gone before the baby comes to that point in his life where he may want to know who did that to him, who whacked off the moving part of his penis. A decade ago, I fired off a shame on you letter to Iowa Methodist Medical Center in Des Moines, Iowa, for docking my foreskin in 1946. Of course, these places never respond or even acknowledge such letters. One of the great obscenities today is that notorious serial circumcisers like Thomas Wiswell and Dr. Edgar Schoen are allowed to write the circumcision entries in World Book Encyclopedia and other such resources. And you should read those sometimes. They're just heinous. You might as well let Charles Manson write the college textbook on criminal justice. I was 25 years old and in graduate school at Northwestern University in 1971 when I picked up an author Gore Vidal's novel Myra Breckinridge after it had been made into a 1970 film. Starring Raquel Welch, starring as Myra Breckinridge. And there it was in chapter 22 on page 99. And I'm going to read you that portion of that book. This is Myra writing. Just as I expected, 72% of the male students are circumcised. At Clem's party, I had been reminded of the promiscuous way in which American doctors circumcise males in childhood, a practice I highly disapprove of. Agreeing with that publisher who is forever advertising in the New York Times book review, a work that proves that circumcision is necessary for only a very few men. For the rest, it constitutes, in the advertiser's phrase, a rape of the penis. Until the 40s, only the upper or educated classes were circumcised in America. The real people were spared this humiliation. But during the affluent post-war years, the operation became standard procedure, making money for doctors as well as allowing the American mother to mutilate her son in order that he might never forget her early power over him. Today, only the poor Boston Irish, the Midwestern Poles, and the Appalachian Southerners can be counted upon to be complete. Myra never forgave Gertrude for her circumcision of him. In fact, he once denounced her in my presence for it. She defended herself by saying that the doctor had recommended it on hygienic grounds, which of course does not hold water since most foreskins are easily manipulated and kept clean. What is truly sinister is the fact that with the foreskin's removal, up to 50% of the sensation of the gland's penis is reduced, a condition no doubt as pleasing to the Puritan American mother as it is to her co-conspirator, the Puritan Jewish doctor, who delights in being able to mutilate the goyim in the same vivid way that his religion and his mother mutilated him. And that's the end of the passage. It goes on. When I read that, all the social justice instincts of me went off at once. Not ever would I let a son of mine have his penis skinned and hung out to dry, I thought. Tragically, in the film, Raquel Welch, supposedly with a swing of her hand, cuts off Myron's foreskin because of power and for strength or something or other. That's a kind of a sick thing in that movie, but supposedly it's a control thing. And we know there is a real fetish in this country among some males about the foreskin, and male groups like a group called Acorn get together supposedly and enjoy luring intact men into their circles and somehow talk them into attending a circumcision party where he has his foreskin lost to the joy of the others attending. Of course, these are extremists. Many in our movement believe a group of doctors get their kicks performing circumcision, but really, who knows? Some of the origins on the where circumcision came from. The genitals have always had a mystique related to fecundity, fertility, and wonderment. They've also been a favorite target for the worst cruelty, rape, castration, and cutting. Circumcision may have been a substitute for the religious ritual of child sacrifice, so sort of like killing only a part of the body of children. Circumcision may have been a sexual sacrifice to the gods. Some say it was done so males symbolically shed blood as women did during menstruation. Circumcision horrified and disgusted the Greeks and Romans who tried to ban it. Commonly it was seen as a tribal rite of passage at puberty. Abraham, as you all know, is said to have circumcised himself at age 99, Genesis 17, as a covenant with God, and ordered all Jews and manservants to be circumcised to keep that covenant. Now there was a Jewish scholar named Maimonides who lived from 1135 to 1204, and he's often quoted for really speaking quite directly why circumcision was a useful thing. He says, as regards circumcision, I think that one of the objects is to limit sexual intercourse and to weaken the organ of generation as far as possible, and thus cause man to be moderate. This commandment has not been enjoined as a complement to a deficient physical creation, but as a means for perfecting man's moral shortcomings. The bodily injury caused to that organ is exactly that which is desired. It does not interrupt any vital function, nor does it destroy the power of generation. Circumcision simply counters excessive lust, for there is no doubt that circumcision weakens the power of sexual excitement and sometimes lessens the excitement and the enjoyment. In modern circumcision, the Victorian age was a time when there were so many technological developments, but there was still a lot of frustration by scientists and doctors over the causes of diseases and where germs came, that there were germs and they were little understood. Doctors were all over the map and speculating on causes of diseases with elixirs and potions and bloodletting and purgings. And of course, masturbation was all the issue then. The popularity probably believed that masturbation was caused by a disease because of the brain, nervous system, heart, and reproductive systems were believed affected negatively when masturbation took place. So some doctors determined circumcision could curb or stop masturbation and thus other diseases. Besides circumcision, they treated males by putting acid on the penis, shredding the penile skin with a knife, cutting nerves to the penis, vasectomy, and castration. A pediatrics textbook in 1887 offered this to medical students. There can be no doubt of masturbation's injurious effects and of the proneness to practice it on the part of children with defective brains. Circumcision should always be practical. It may be necessary to make the genitals so sore by blistering that pain results from attempts to rub the parts. And little girls were also subjected to comparable treatment. Some doctors advocated circumcision to cure, listen to some of these, epilepsy, convulsions, spinal paralysis, elephantitis, tuberculosis, eczema, bedwetting, hip joint disease, fecal incontinence, rectal prolapse, wet dreams, hernias, headaches, hydrocephalus, there we go, nervousness, poor eyesight, idiocy, mental retardation, and insanity. Now, when the 20th century came along, during the Roaring '20s, infant circumcision gained popularity with the increasing affluent middle class, which thought that it could provide an advantage to their sons. Anti-masturbation sentiments reached historical proportions as the circumcisers cut their way through orphanages, schools, boys' schools, and juvenile halls. One boy asked a nurse why he had to be cut, and the nurse told him, "Because that skin makes you do so naughty things." Because that skin makes you do naughty things. By 1930, 40% of males were circumcised in the United States. World War II started the big step up of circumcision. Military leaders sent GIs to the infirmary for circumcisions. Disease was all the worry. Penicillin hadn't been invented yet, and foreskins were regarded as part of the enemy. It was argued that a soldier in a foxhole surely would get sand inside of his foreskin. And General George Patton had such an anti-foreskin mania that he was quoted as commenting during a tour of an empty facility when the Western Front was quiet, that he said this, "Fill these beds with uncircumcised men and circumcise them." In circumcision, a protective skin fold, something nature has put there, is lopped off. We don't do it to our dogs or our male livestock, to our horses or bulls or rams. If it is such a good idea, why don't we extend this surgery to our animal friends? We certainly don't civilize them by declawing them, neutering them, dehorning cows, debeaking chickens. If being foreskin free is so good for your son, why not old Buddy the dog? We would try to, circumcision is simply bizarre, peculiar, absurd, barbaric, and medically unethical. It's cruel, it hurts, and it's simply an institutionally sanctioned form of sexual assault. We would try to get a pervert thrown in jail for touching our son's privates, but a stranger doctor can cut off 50 to 80% of the private's exterior skin and his most private and male distinctive structures and get paid $150. It's just strange and repulsive. Circumcision proponents would want you to believe that the foreskin is useless, excess, or redundant skin, too ugly for women to look at, one more body part to wash and keep clean, and something that leads to the disease du jour, that we're also uncivilized with them. Uninformed, misinformed, and especially conformist parents often insist on circumcision. Reason plays little part in their decision. Parents will joke about how they could never have the courage or stomach to watch a circumcision performed. They joke that they are glad that they had girls so their babies didn't have to go through with it. And once the dirty deed is done, they say, "Poor baby." And they rationalize to themselves they did the right thing. Little Junior needed it done like all the males in the family for the last 60 years. And isn't it just so nice that Daddy and Baby look the same? Isn't that just, they all look alike? That's so nice. Circumcisers do their deeds because they can, because parents give consent. Just about the only surgery not medically needed, but which parents are able to authorize done. They couldn't ask their doctors to cut off a right earlobe or a baby toe. In the early 1970s, informed consent came into practice. And that was partly driven by Jews themselves who were upset that the hospital was so routinely circumcising baby boys at birth that they were cutting off the foreskins before they could get them to the 8th day and have the bris ceremony. And so that was one of the factors in it. Circumcision is essentially parent-requested cosmetic surgery on an offspring for a spurious reason or for no good reason, and they'll keep on doing it until society has its consciousness raised, or there are enough lawsuits, or the medical community is shamed into giving up the lucrative practice of about $240 million a year. No medical society in the world advocates circumcision. More than anything, circumcision is sustained by the tyranny of conformity. Family members put all sorts of overt and subtle peer. Family members put all sorts of overt and subtle peer pressure on young parents who are otherwise ill-informed, and pregnant women run into enormous and intense discussions with girlfriends, and to go against the grain and say, our son deserves to keep his foreskin. They get strange looks when they say that to their friends, and they're regarded as maverick parents. Oh, he won't even know it happened. When he grows up, someone will try to tell this mother. So why do they still circumcise at a time when other kinds of surgeries have gone by the wayside? Remember when doctors routinely removed tonsils, when appendectomies were routinely done, when hysterectomies were so common? Medical research found new methods short of such radical actions. But why does circumcision survive? Why? For many reasons. The foreskin has been trivialized, it's been discounted as not being important because it's not understood for the purpose of why nature put it there. Circumcision is genital mutilation, penile reduction surgery, a form of sanctioned sexual abuse on the helpless against their wills. Tribal folkways steeped in mystique, mysticism, and superstition have long focused on the genitalia, sources of procreation, fecundity, and pleasure. The genitals have been forever the target for cruelty and perversion, rapes, castrations, indescribable brutality to males and females. Hit them where it hurts has been the mantra. Again, countless theories exist about male circumcision's origins, and we've talked about those. Initiation ceremonies, rites of passage, distinctly marking a tribe, causing a bleeding as a counterpart to female menstruation, power and dominance. Some of you read time in the news how they, I think it's in one of the northern African nations recently, they had 5,000 circumcisions, to celebrate some prince's birthday. In Africa, they often have mass circumcisions for rites of passages. Jews were not the first to circumcise, though the Jewish ritual is attributed to Abraham, and we talked about that. There's what's called circumcisions, or reasons people give for why they submit their sons to surgery. The website is called Superstitions, or Circumstitions, and it has 324 different excuses for justification. I'm just going to read a few of those. Because they're my kids, and I do any GD thing I want to do with them, so you lost this argument. Because it is sin not to. Because my children with a foreskin would be a pedophile. I am not sure why, but my family has done it for a long time. You could call it tradition, I guess. Because my family has always had circumcisions. Because of custom, because of habit, and the way the society works. Because it was simply a common social custom which we took more or less for granted. Because to not circumcise is old-fashioned, somebody said. Because it is a good and proper thing to do. Because all the nice families are having it done. To teach him that the world is a painful place. That life hurts. To toughen him up for real life. Because it teaches them that pain doesn't matter. Because the doctor just likes doing it. Because circumcision is insignificant compared to the truly important issues that come with raising a child. Because I don't want to upset my mother-in-law. Because my mother won't babysit him if he's not circumcised. Because his mother doesn't want to have to explain why his penis looks different from his father's. I didn't want him to question why Daddy looked different. If I had to, he has to keep peace in the family. Because the doctor knows best. Because it makes the penis look more modern. Because it's one more thing that sets us apart from the apes. Because I kind of think it's American. In the early years of this great nation, we took pride in being different than any nation. Because it's the American thing to do. Because the foreskin concentrates negative energy. Because Jesus was circumcised. Because women's magazines advise it. We wanted him to fit in. Because his mother feared his father wouldn't bond with him if they didn't look the same. Because everyone in our family is circumcised. And finally, because it cuts down excessive libido, which leads to adultery. There's a lot of books out on circumcision, and one of them is called, one of them called The Joy of Uncircumcising, and it deals with ways to restore oneself. But here are some of the statements that have been shared through the years about the pain of circumcision. So, these are the voices of men. I've wondered what it's like to have a foreskin all my life. Adrenaline shoots through me when I hear the word circumcision. I freeze. I couldn't even make myself say circumcised until I was in my 20s. I hate the word. The sound "sir" makes me shudder. I used to think there were two kinds of boys, circumcised boys like me and real boys. The fact that other boys were circumcised too never made me feel any better. When I was a child, I prayed I would get my foreskin back in heaven. I think of myself and other circumcised men as amputees. I'm always thinking, where is my foreskin? I went to nude beach in Yugoslavia and felt like a freak. I'm Jewish and I hate being circumcised. What possible advantage could there be to removing from the penis its only moving part? My first sadomasochistic experience was when I was a baby, when I was circumcised. My mother told me she could hear my screams from the other end of the hall. I think I could have accepted a deformity that was an accident of nature, but I can't accept that someone did that to me. I never let women see my circumcised penis because I think it's ugly. I tried several times to ask my mother about what had been done to me, but when I opened my mouth to speak, the words stuck in my throat and no sound came out. Damn my parents and their superstitious religious rituals. I have revenge fantasies about circumcision. I want to kill the doctors who circumcised me. Butchers. Why would anyone cut off part of a baby's penis? Why would anyone let himself or anyone else do it? The worst thing about circumcision is that it produces circumcisers. Fear, pain, crippling disfigurement, humiliation are the classic ways to break the human spirit. Circumcision includes them all. My feeling about the doctor who circumcised me are too violent to describe. I was just a baby. I couldn't stop them. I'm not going to read all of this, but there's a great book by Desmond Morris who says circumcision is in fact the only really severe form of primitive mutilation to have resisted the modern trend toward abhorrence of body violation. He says if it wasn't done to babies, if it was done to people older, it would die of its own death because people would run away in fear of what was happening to them. R.T. in Denver, Colorado says, if American men who were circumcised at birth could know the deprivation of pleasure that they would experience, they would storm the hospitals and not permit their sons to undergo the unnecessary loss. But how can they know this? You have to be circumcised as an adult, as I was, to realize a terrible loss of pleasure results from this cruel operation. And Dr. Eugene Rodman at Stanford University Medical School said, widespread circumcision is a relic of a time when patients were not provided much of a voice in medical decision-making. That era may be rapidly coming to an end. In this case, the old dictum that if it ain't broke, don't fix it seems to make good sense. Submitting your son to the procedure to prevent urinary infections, for example, makes only a little more sense than buying insurance against being gored by a unicorn in Riverside. And my last slide, I like to use this statement that civilization is just a slow process of learning to be kind. We'll probably not get circumcision banished in my lifetime, but I think we'll make some progress. There are a lot of forces in this world against circumcision. Some of those are people like Howard Stern, on the crazy disc jockey who's been fighting circumcision for many years. Dr. Dean Adele, a radio and TV doctor who had his first son circumcised, who's Jewish. He says there are now serious concerns that this routine procedure may actually deprive adult men of a vital part of their sexual sensitivity. And of course, Benjamin Spock, we talked about. My own preference, if I had the good fortune to have another son, would be to leave his little penis alone. And finally, Ashley Montague, anthropologist, said, circumcision is a very cruel, very painful practice with no benefit whatsoever. recently I got a new vehicle, and so I decided to get my license plate changed. And I applied to the Arizona Motor Vehicles Division, and I thought I'd get a personalized plate. So I started out, I went to the website to see if anything about circumcision had been taken, and it hadn't been. So I decided to get a, you see this coming. I decided to get the letters NOCIRCM. That's 7 letters for no circumcision. NOCIRCM. And I decided to get the child abuse prevention plate that says it shouldn't hurt to be a child. So putting those two together had a fairly good message, I thought. Well, I applied for it, paid my money, and lo and behold, I get this letter back from the Motor Vehicle Division saying that that may be either misleading or offensive to the public. Well, that sent me off to my word processor very quickly to write a letter to them. And I wrote them a letter, and I said, in no way is this intended to offend, in no way misleads. This isn't flippant or trying to be cute. This is serious and thoughtful. I'm sure you have plates that call for no war or an end to war, for vegetarianism or no smoking. You have issued atheists in Iraq. Neither offend me, but surely they offend some. Surely the ADOT and MVD are to be commended for this open-mindedness and letting license plates make statements. Beyond the revenue, there is the livelier interest in what is on license plates and education and consciousness raising that go with it. You have already issued the words Muslim and Israel. You have issued barf, hot girl, and hunter. They don't offend me, but they could irk some others. Some years ago, living in Iowa, I had the personalized plate editor. The reporters under me could have felt I was flaunting my authority with that plate. And I noted that, they're going to bring up the Jewish issue. Well, this is going to offend Jews, that no circumcision. So I said, lest you seek to raise an issue that a no circumcision statement might annoy Jews who ritually practice circumcision, you should know that more than a few Jewish parents do not put their male offspring through circumcision. I said, most of the books written in the U.S. to enlighten parents to medical ethics and human rights issues relate to circumcision are Jewish. Dr. Ron Goldman, a book called Circumcision with Hidden Trauma and Questioning Circumcision, a Jewish Perspective. Dr. Edward Wallenstein, Circumcision and American Health Fallacy. Dr. Paul Fleiss, What Your Doctor May Not Tell You About Circumcision, Untold Facts on America's Most Widely Performed and Most Unnecessary Surgery. Rosemary Romberg, Circumcision, The Painful Dilemma. Norm Cohen, the son of a rabbi, leads the Michigan chapter of the National Organization of Circumcision Information Resource Service, and it goes on and on. But in any event, I sent them this letter, and they were going to send my request to a specialized plate review committee that meets once a month. Well, they didn't wait for that committee to meet. They called me and said that it had been approved. But I had also sent a couple copies of my columns for the Tribune with that, and I think more than anything they were probably fearful that this newsman was going to get, if I got turned down, would raise havoc with him and cause some problems. Finally, I just want to point out there are all kinds of books out there. Say No to Circumcision, 40 Compelling Reasons by Thomas Ritter. Circumcision, The Hidden Trauma by Ron Goldman. Questioning Circumcision, A Jewish Perspective. Foreskin, A Closer Look. The book of the PS has a chapter that, one of their chapters mixes both castration and circumcision together. I wonder why. A book called As Sex as Nature Intended. This woman did research and found that women who have had sex with both intact and circumcised males have found that there's more pleasure and less chafing from an uncut nail. Making America Safe for Foreskins. The Case Against Routine Circumcision. The Joy of Being a Boy. Deeper into Circumcision. One of the best magazines that came out was Mothering Magazine a few years ago. The little baby on the cover says, "Where is my foreskin?" Men's Health, Men's Journal, they did a wonderful story about is it still wise to circumcise? Did circumcise ruin your sex life? With a main headline, Separated at Birth, showing a crying baby. Wonderful, wonderful article there. The article about how to protect your child when he goes to examination, and he meets a new doctor and decides he's got a foreskin, we got to get rid of that. How to protect yourself against that. Here's a letter to the editor that I wrote after one of the articles by Lon Griffiths in Tempe, Arizona. And I can't find my glasses. Come here. I'll just read you a little bit of that.
We need to take some questions.
Okay. Let's take some questions now. Yes?
You said that there's a snowball's chance in hell of the law being passed against circumcision. Why don't you go at it in a way that you don't want to outlaw circumcision, but not have it done until the person is old enough to consent to it?
Well,
Basically, it's outlawed until at least they're 18 and old enough to consent to it.
you know, that's the way it is lots in Europe. I personally think it's going to be outlawed when there's some nasty lawsuits that are going to cost some doctors a lot of money. That either procedures weren't followed or men rise up in anger. There have been some out-of-court settlements and a few court settlements about that. But yeah, but it's a paradigm shift to get. We got this problem with if it's your child, you can vaccinate him and do all these kinds of medical things for them, and people think that they have full rights to do whatever they want their children as children. Yes.
How do you explain in the 40s some of the adult men were circumcised? Then they didn't get fathered in this. How do you explain why they chose to have their sons circumcised?
Well, I think there was a thing sold about cleanliness in this country. No longer were babies being born at home; they were being born in hospitals, and they were there was this a tendency to let hospitals and doctors just do their thing. That you didn't question this, and I think there were all kinds of medical things we didn't question. Doctors who routinely asked for hysterectomies and tonsillectomies and appendectomies and all these other kinds of procedures. Do you have an answer?
Well, yeah, our doctor basically said that when we said we didn't want to have circumcision done, said implied that we might be anti-Jew.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. There's some of that. Yes.
But you're not
You know,
I know.
I just wonder that instead of going about changing this situation, either legally, because now you're fighting someone who, if you're trying to stop the doctors, they have something to gain by doing this monetarily. It's their livelihood in some cases. I think educating a parent-to-be is where this needs to be done, because I'm a guilty mother, and at the time I questioned it, I got all those things, and I believe them. I believed that if I didn't do this, my son would have all these kinds of diseases, and who knows what would happen to this little thing, you know. And now, and soon afterwards, I regretted it. But I think the target audience is a young, immature person who maybe isn't open to as much. So education to me is really the way to go, because after it's done, it's done.
Now, there's a lot, like I said, lots of things. When my daughter and two of her friends at Arizona State did term papers, they all did it on circumcision. I provided the research information, and that helped to kind of pass the thing out. There are chapters of dental integrity on some college campuses where they do talks about this. It's a really...
Well, maybe something at the time, because when I questioned the doctor, I didn't get answers like, well, we don't know. No, the answers were very straightforward and, dogmatic, that this is how it is. You have to do this so your son will be clean and this and that. And so maybe if there was more of a factual statement and more of an obvious sign-off on, I have a choice, and I'm choosing to do this.
Well, informed consent is pretty much required in hospitals today.
But I mean, one that makes sense and tells the story like it is.
Yeah, some of us think that all parents should watch a film about showing circumcision before they decide whether to have it done or not.
Not parents, but parents to
be. Parents to be, right.
See,
Yeah.
it's at that time they're the hardest ones to read.
Well, one thing he's fighting against is women's magazines don't take it up. The men's magazines sometimes do. You get people like the TV show The View, which really makes fun of the whole idea of fighting against circumcision. Yeah, right here.
I just want to make a remark about this. It's a mistake to think that culture is rational. And there's a phenomenon or a concept in anthropology. I'm an anthropologist. I say it's a mistake to think that culture is rational. There's a concept in anthropology, I'm an anthropologist, called elite emulation. One remarked that back in the earlier part of the past century, circumcision was relatively, so to say, circumscribed. In other words, it was confined to the elite. Most people didn't circumcise. And time and time again, in any culture, you get this phenomenon of elite emulation. In the period of prosperity after World War II, the ordinary person was in a position to emulate the elite. And that probably accounts for part of the reason, at least, why circumcision became more widespread in American society. There are countless phenomena like circumcision. It happens to be that circumcision is a pernicious sort of a thing, apparently. The way to undo a practice like this is to, as is always the case, is to try to educate people.
But Joe, a lot of things like smoking in the workplace or sexual abuse in the workplace was quickly stamped out, I think, by lawsuits and threats of lawsuits. And I really think that that's one of the real things. You know, we can't. I like to see doctors be shamed. I stood up in front of 800 people one time when I was the keynote speaker at volunteers at Valley Lutheran Hospital and Mesa Lutheran Hospital, and I mentioned that shame on this hospital for still performing circumcision in this day and age. You should have heard that hush sound in the audience for me bringing this subject up, and the next day I got several calls from people saying, "How dare you bring up this subject in this kind of a venue?" And you get that all the time.
Lauren, you made a very compelling argument against circumcision. So compelling, I think you probably convinced me. But in all due respect, you gave a list of complaints that men have made who were circumcised. And I have known thousands of circumcised men. I'm Jewish and I grew up in a Jewish neighborhood, and almost everybody I grew up with, males, were circumcised. I have never once heard anybody say that they are sorry that they were circumcised.
I'm sorry I was circumcised.
Well, that's the first one I've heard. But that's one out of many thousand. Now, the other question I had was, it seems to me I read somewhere or heard somewhere that the incidence of carcinoma of the cervix was more common in the wives of uncircumcised men.
Well, they say those studies were done. They did Jewish couples and non-Jewish couples. They found, Jewish couples had less cancer, but they found out that the lifestyles, the behaviors of Jewish couples are better. They're better behaved, and therefore there's not that common. It didn't become that common. That's the same thing with AIDS in Africa. They try to compare. Circumcised men and uncircumcised men in this country versus in Africa. These are totally different cultural situations. You think the number of uncircumcised men in Europe, where circumcision is often unheard of, in northern, particularly Scandinavia, that you would have a high incidence of AIDS, but you don't. You have more in this country. You just can't make those comparable things. But as far as why all the people you never complained, I think it's a consciousness raising thing. You're born that way, so what? I don't know what it's like without it, so go on with life.
Well, I've never been asked. No one's ever asked me if I'm sorry I was circumcised. I mean, it's never been a question that I've addressed. So I mean, I'm not surprised that I haven't heard other people tell me they're sorry or not sorry that they're circumcised. It's never been a conversation.
It's a dirty
All
little
the
secret.
people that he described seem to talk about it quite a
But
bit.
he searched out the evidence and was able to find it, and if he had asked me, he would have gotten my answer, but no one's ever asked me. So, I'm sorry I'm circumcised, actually, and I have thought about it before. So I would have preferred not being circumcised.
Why?
Why? I don't see any rationale to have done it, and I must admit, you put one up on there that hit me personally. I've got a daughter, and one of the things that I could say when she was born about glad that she wasn't a son is not having to face my parents when I wanted to tell them that I wouldn't have him circumcised. And I'm glad I didn't have to make that choice or have that discussion with my Jewish parents. who would have been very much offended.
I just wondered about the statistics you gave at the end. You talked about the prevalence of it. Whether those did not include ones that are done, by oil in a home as part of the business, they're outside the hospital, those not get counted.
As far as I know, these are all babies born in hospitals.
Oh, okay, so they probably don't include.
Right.
But that's a small percentage of our
Yeah, so I
population.
know.
Yeah.
Yes, I think that the message probably is becoming more public. Penn and Teller had a very
Yes.
interesting show on that, and I suspect that they may have a more immature audience, possibly.
Yeah, on April 25th, Penn and Teller BS show had these two guys doing all this and really.
Bullshit.
Yeah, it's iconoclastic stuff. And they had a half-hour show, and it had Marilyn Milos and all these people, and even had a guy who showed his restored Venus. But that was a wonderful show. That reached an audience that is very valuable for helping to denounce circumcision. Yes.
Yeah, well, as a circumcised male, I take exception to your comment that circumcised males don't glide.
Hang gliding doesn't count.
It's been my experience that the female is properly prepared. There is no problem gliding.
Well,
Uncircumcised men, let me tell you, there is no comparison. We talk about gliding and
That's those who
movements,
know.
and, I mean, really, there's no comparison. And I'm just saying, having seen the tips of both circumcised and uncircumcised, the circumcised male's tips are dry and scaly, a little bit chafed and rough. There's just no comparison between the two of them. And I've seen enough.
It also bears mentioning that there's a certain degrees of circumcision. Some where very little is cut off, and some where they're so radical that when one gets to the erection, that there's such a tight erection that it's very painful because too much has been cut off. And some thoughtful circumcisers will cut a minimal amount off to satisfy that he's been circumcised, but it leaves enough so that there is enough for gliding and enough for real movement, so that when at the thrust there is enough foreskin that can come back over the glands and that can really.
So badly, you can just see them must just be pulled so tight because it can't achieve a straight erection.
Right.
It just,
Right. Other questions? Yes. Oh.
I'm married to an uncircumcised one, so that's no.
Okay. Got a question in front here.
Well, I'm Jewish. I'm circumcised. I have never had a complaint from any woman. Never. In fact, if anything, they said it's very pretty. I don't have any problems gliding. And as far as sensitivity, the single word I hear the most when I'm having sex is it's not a problem.
Well, when all is said and done, I think there is a right to sovereignty over one's own body, one to wholeness as nature intended us to be, to have everything that we are given by nature, and that a parent, no matter how well-meaning and loving a parent may be, I think that parent has barriers and limits to what they can do to their children. I think cutting off part of their sexuality to satisfy their own religious or cultural or other kinds of biases, it goes beyond the boundaries.
Well, maybe this will be a little encouraging to you. I'm a nanny, so I take a lot of diapers, and some of them are boys. I mean, again, I don't work in a daycare center, so I don't see, hundreds and hundreds of kids, but just from my own, personal experience, and these are usually pretty educated parents who are hiring, a nanny. But just in my experience, I haven't seen very many who've had it done. And generally, if I comment, they say, oh, I can do that. Unless they're Jewish. So that's, just from my own small informal survey, it's very much on the decline.
I think the humanists can grow our cultural membership by saying we don't require circumcision.
Totally optional.
what, Paige?
Bob.
You're right.
Bob.
Join us because we don't think you get circumcised.
I had mine done about 15 years ago. Because I wanted it done, because it was redundant and bothersome all my life. So I opt for
You're here. I think it should be.
outlawing child or newborn doing, but it should be left up to the adult after the person.
I agree. It should be a choice by a mature person with majority.
Well, I think a benefit of it is that it might encourage men to do more foreplay.
My only comment is that where I can see the logic of all of this, and for people who are not a member of either the conservative or the Orthodox Jewish religion, it makes a lot of sense. You have your work cut out for you trying to change, because I know I come from that background, trying to change an entire culture to suddenly decide after 2,500 years, oops, we're not going to do this anymore. It's not going to happen.
Well, you don't have to have your foreskin cut off to be Jewish. You're being born to a Jewish mother makes you a Jew. And I can tell you, early in this movement, there were a lot of us who have backed off of challenging, putting that exception in there. Well, but it's okay for Jews or Muslims or others for religious reasons to not do it. But you found these angry Jews that came forward, who I quoted some here, say, "Hey, don't leave us out. We believe we have a right to our own body integrity as well."
But those are the liberated ones, and the free-thinking ones, and the more modern ones, and probably reform or humanistic ones. But the Orthodox and the conservative ones, this is part of the tradition, it's part of the ritual, it's part of a ceremony, it's a religious thing, and they're not giving up their religion. We wish they would, but they're not.
But we say Judaism has changed enormously from a lot of the harsh and legalistic and tough and cruel kinds of things that were part of those 613 items that were supposed to be law. They backed off on changed and given up, literally. And then we think that this is one of those things that could be along part of that as well. One more.
Yeah, you're an advocate against circumcision.
Right.
There may be one instance where you should be for it. And that would be where someone's been arrested and incarcerated for molestation or sexual sickness, right? And on condition of their release, they are circumcised. So that they can't enjoy it as much.
Castrated. One more.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought it was an interesting experience with circumcision. When I also was Jewish. When I got back from the military, my grandmother saw my tattoos, and she freaked out. She said, "Dad, you can't be buried in the Jewish cemetery." And I said, "Well, what's the logic behind that?" She said, "You have to return to God the way you came." And he altered. So I said, "Well, then, what about circumcision?" And she didn't have answers to that. But anyway, to make her feel better, I thought, well, so I'll be buried. Why can't I be buried in a Gentile cemetery? She said, "Well, you probably could, because Gentiles don't care what they bury."
I want to thank you for your attention. I want to thank Alan for all his help with my slideshow, for Beal for the introduction, and for Susan for allowing me to come.
Wait, did you get this?
If you appreciate the Humanist Society of Greater Phoenix and would like to see more, then subscribe to our channel and check us out on Patreon. Links are in the description.